Got it. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
And this says recording, right?
Does it say
Yep,
recording?
the bottom.
Yep.
Yes, it is.
Okay,
It's
perfect.
okay.
Okay.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
I'm Senator Barbara Favola, and joining me this morning is Congressman Beyer, who's representing our constituents in the 8th Congressional District.
Good
and
morning.
Congressman and Deputy Commissioner Jessica Bowman with our State Department of Elections. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, I hope you're all doing the best you can possibly do in helping each and every one of us get through this challenge that we're facing. This is a time where we all need to come together, and we all are responsible for each other's health and safety and well-being. So it's a unique opportunity, and it's a very unique challenge. And we appreciate the help that everybody has been giving to each other. Governor Northam, I think, has been doing a good job in forging a pathway forward that will keep Virginians safe, and will also attempt to balance the many different fabrics of our community, all the different services that are needed in our small businesses. As you know, Governor Northam did issue an executive order on March 30th. He issued one on March 12th, which asked us all to ban gatherings of more than 10 individuals and to practice social distancing. And that was as early as March 12th. And then about last week or 10 days ago, he issued a more aggressive order, which essentially it told us that we had to stay at home unless we needed to go out for food and beverages. If we had to do that, to wear a face mask, to stay 6 feet apart from our closest person in the vicinity. And he did make some exceptions. Certainly outdoor exercise would be good, and that is something that we can participate in, again, practicing social distancing. If you have to travel to and from work, that's certainly something that individuals have to do. We strongly encourage companies to be doing telework. Some folks are volunteering at charitable organizations, again, social distancing and wearing a face mask, and no public gatherings of more than 10 individuals. Local police officers can question individuals and enforce this order, so you should know that. And of course, our public schools are closed for the remainder of this academic year. So that's where we are today. I can, give you some statistics if that's of interest. So, right, as of Friday, Virginia had over 4,000 COVID IV cases. We had tested more than 35,000 individuals. We hospitalized 772, and our deaths were 121. So I don't know where that puts us in the pack, but you can certainly go to the Virginia Department of Health, vdh.virginia.gov /coronavirus, if you want to get up-to-date information on health status in Virginia. And if you want other useful information on how to deal with this emergency, please go to vaemergency.gov /coronavirus. And we will post those sites on our Facebook, and I'm sure that Congressman Beyer, you're probably posting those links on your Facebook as well. So I will stop and ask Congressman Beyer to make a few remarks, and then Jessica Bowman, and then Julia Chun will moderate some questions.
Well, Barbara, thank you for inviting me to be part of this. It's fun to be on with Jessica, who is in the center of the storm on what's going to happen in our elections. We've been, this is 1 month today that I've been self-quarantining. the first 4 or 5 days was because we had had dinner, Megan and I, with a dear friend who came down with coronavirus a few days later. He had been, the day before we had dinner with him, he had been at the Biogen conference in Boston, where many, many people got sick. So the Virginia Department of Health suggested that we self-quarantine. We've been fine the whole time, getting a little stir crazy, but trying to model the right behavior. I opened the pro forma session of the House yesterday. We have to do this every 3 or 4 days. So I did it with a mask my daughter had made for me, which is the first thing I've done viral in a long time.
Wow, that's interesting.
Made the New York Times this morning and all
Oh,
kinds
wow,
of good
that's
stuff.
cool. That's great.
It was interesting that I think the deputy parliamentarian didn't want me wearing it. And I was like, I need to model the right behavior for all the people that were encouraging to do this. And it turned out we real well. And the main reason I went in, though, was to sign the special resolution that Tim Kaine had sponsored on limiting the war powers of the president, saying that any president, Democrat or Republican, couldn't engage in something more like 60 days worth of military action without coming to the Congress for approval. And Tim had worked on this for years, going back in the Obama administration, and was finally able to get a handful, 6 or 7 Republicans, maybe 8, to vote for it, enough to pass it in a Senate controlled by the Republicans. And then we passed it in the House easily. And so I got to, Nancy Pelosi asked me to sign as the Speaker pro tempore on this bill. So it was wonderful for the 2 Virginians to come together. Tim obviously deserving 99% of the credit, but it was fun to sign it.
That's great.
We are busier than we've ever been. All the team, our 4-person staff in the field out of Roslyn, led by Noah Simon, formerly of the Arlington School Board, and hopefully with a grand Arlington civic future ahead, is leading all the constituent service work we're doing, which is just as busy as ever. One young man, John Daniels, has been just working on 8th District people stuck overseas. We have 30,000 Americans that are still trying to get home from India and Switzerland and Australia and all kinds of places. And so he's working really closely with the State Department every day and with the airlines trying to get them back. Noah and Jeremy have spent most of their time on the small business stuff, because we have an enormous number of restaurants and gyms and car dealerships and all kinds of people that are largely shut down or completely shut down. And so, and tons of people that need unemployment insurance. Jessica, who's busy running the government in Richmond, will happily tell you that the $600 unemployment insurance will start flowing this coming week from Virginia. Virginia was swamped. Our Virginia Employment Commission, the VEC,
Right.
as you know, it just completely overwhelmed, and people were very frustrated. They were on the phone for a long time or couldn't get callbacks. And as the governor said, when you have something that's used to doing a small number of claims and it suddenly explodes, it just takes a while to catch up. But they have caught up. The Virginia unemployment plus the $600 federal unemployment will start to flow in 2 days, which is terrific. And then the payment protection plan for small businesses, we allocated $350 billion to that. We're going through that very quickly. We will allocate another $250 billion probably this coming week. And my guess is we'll end up over $1 trillion to direct grants to small businesses. Senator, as you know, they're positioned as loans at 1%, but as long as you maintain your payroll, the government will forgive all of the loan. So I'll stop talking here, but one last thing. We've already allocated more than $2.3 trillion of federal government money, everything from state and local governments to hospitals to small businesses, even to big businesses. The next tranche, which Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, Steve Mnuchin are negotiating right now, is, in rough terms, the $250 billion more for small and medium-sized businesses I mentioned, another $200 million for state and local governments. I think what we've heard really clearly is, for example, Mark Schwartz, the county manager for Arlington, has talked about huge budget holes already. In Alexandria, it's $100 million budget hole just from the crisis so far.
Right.
So we need a lot more money coming to, and of course, Governor Northam talked about, we
Right.
can use above our rainy day fund right away. And then finally, another huge 100 billion tranche for the hospitals and the healthcare workers. So I'll pause. One more thing though, before we get to Jessica. One of the things that the Democrats are fighting really hard for, and I have to say more than half the caucus has made this their #1 priority, is getting vote for mail in the next, in the CARES 2 package, anticipating, we're looking at the disaster of Wisconsin, the immoral disaster, and making sure that every American citizen has the ability to vote going forward. The governor's postponing the June election, but
Right.
we could have a second wave. We don't want to have a second wave. We're trying to prevent it. But if there is a second wave and it affects the November election, you want to make sure that vote at home is a possibility for every American.
Right.
And with that, I'll pause and look forward to listening to Jessica.
Well, welcome, Jessica. So you've been in the hotbed a little bit, especially with some of our towns hosting May elections, and now with the governor's decision to really move those elections to November. I know the decision wasn't easy, but I think we ended up in the right place. So we're happy to hear your thoughts and your perspective.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. Good to be with you this morning. It was a hard decision. As the governor announced this week, he will be asking the General Assembly to approve language that would move elections to the May elections to November. There's around 56, 57 localities, over 100 cities and towns that do have municipal elections on May 5th. We do not see a plausible way to keep Virginians healthy and safe to cast their ballot on May 5th. I think Wisconsin showed how problematic that can be. And the governor has made it very clear that his #1 priority is the health and safety of all Virginians. So that is a very big decision. And we look forward to the General Assembly coming back outside or in tents at the Science Museum, whatever your venue may be, to approve that language. The other thing he announced this week was moving the June election by 2 weeks. So from
The primary election.
Yes, the primary election from June 9th to June 23rd. He does have the executive authority to do that, so that will not be in General Assembly consideration on April 22nd. We have been encouraging people to vote absentee. Currently, our absentee system is excuse-based. That will be changing after July 1st. But in the meantime, we have issued guidance that you can use disability or illness as your excuse to get an absentee ballot, and you can request one online at elections.virginia.gov. And the website walks you through that process on how to use that reason. To Congressman Beyer's comments, there was funding in the CARES Act for elections. It came with a state match. So we look forward to seeing how that plays out maybe in future legislation. So we are considering all options for November. We know there is a possibility of a second wave. We know there could be very much a new normal, regardless if that happens. So getting poll worker training, encouraging young people to come work their polls. So, some of the more vulnerable population is not exposed to numerous people. I will also say that vote by mail systems, there always is also an in-person component to those. So Colorado, Oregon, there is somewhere you can go either drop off your ballot or you can cast your vote in person. So the ACLU last week, I think they articulated it best when they said it's not a vote by mail or in-person system, it's and. So we're talking about ands, not ors.
I think that's an interesting point, because everybody has an absentee ballot. I mean, most states have absentee ballot options, if not all states, and those absentee ballot options are mail-in. So one could argue today we have a mail-in and an in-person. It's just we're heavily relying on the in-person. So perhaps the new norm will be to really push the mail-in either through absentee, or if we can do, we now will have a no excuse absentee mail-in starting July 1. So that should be in effect for our November elections. Is that right?
Yes, and the other important part of legislation that passed this year when you're talking about absentee ballots is the acceptance of those ballots. So currently those ballots have to be received in an office by 7 p.m. on election day. The General Assembly passed legislation this year that extends that acceptance period to noon on Friday, which I think is really important when you're talking about the postal system and how, the length of business mail has gone from, 3 days to 7 days. So really important that we are accepting those ballots after election day as well, so someone isn't getting disenfranchised because the mail was slow.
Good
And I'm
point.
sure the congressman can talk more about USPS challenges we may be facing in the future as we go. So I will stop there. I'm happy to take questions, but that is where we are. Once again, looking forward. The election in May is not moved yet. That will take General Assembly approval on April 22nd.
Well, I look forward to being part of that decision process.
One addition to Jessica's wonderful comments about the vote by mail and the vote in person is that a number of the states actually mail the ballots to everybody. I'm not sure Oregon, Colorado, Washington, which ones do. Senators, I lived in Switzerland for 4 years, where they have the best little d democratic system in the world. They vote on darn near everything.
Yeah.
And they have 4 elections a year. They actually call them votations. They're held on Sundays, but they mail all the ballots 3 weeks ahead of time. And so 80% of the people will vote by mail. The other 20% will show up and vote in person.
I think
But they get a massive turnout. So
I think there's real interest in moving that way, because as you know, for our absentee ballot system, a voter has to request the ballot.
right.
I suppose we could send notices out suggesting that voters request the ballot. So that is an option, but I really like the idea of mailing every ballot out and allowing this significant vote by mail. I think that's a great pathway forward. So I hope Congress is successful in giving us a framework for that.
Too. And then someday, with a different president and a different Senate, we can do our best to get the money out of politics, the big money. And that would be, again, move us back to something where people are basing their votes on a lot of important policy information and character information rather than trillions of dollars in negative ads.
Yeah. Well, we can only hope, right? Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Julia. She has a list of questions that I think our folks came in on my email, and they may be coming in on Facebook now. Are they coming in on Facebook now?
Yes, ma'am, they are. I'm going to start, though, asking some questions that came in ahead of today's session via email. And please just let me know if you cannot hear me, but we're going to start with a number of elections and voting related questions that we got pretty early on. And the first one is, there are privacy concerns about the Social Security number requirement on the absentee ballot. Should people be concerned that it's required?
So if you're requesting an absentee ballot online, it does only require the last 4 digits of your social security number. We have very safe elections in Virginia. Before this happened, I would imagine I would be on a teletown hall talking about cybersecurity in Russia. And our eye hasn't been taken off the ball in that venue either. So our system is safe and secure. If you are having trouble with requesting it or you don't know it, you can contact your local registrar's office. Also, local registrars are offering curbside in-person absentee voting right now and before the election. So you can call them ahead of time and they would actually come out to your car, and a social security number would not be required in that instance. A photo ID would, but your social security number would not, if that is more comfortable for you.
Is there anything else on elections? Because we've got 6 or 7 other major areas. So
We do. So we'll just
Move
go through
on.
them super quick.
okay.
The next question is, how is Virginia going to ensure that November elections can go forward safely with full access to voting in November?
Sure. And once again, we are looking at all options are still on the table. We are lucky we were a Super Tuesday state, and we're not put in a position that Wisconsin and some other states were in. So we are looking to June and to November. Obviously, pushing the no excuse absentee voting will be a big part of our process, and local registrars doing that. But we are looking at contingency plans, safe places to hold polling places, procedures. If people do want to come vote in person, social distancing at polling places. A lot of what you've seen around the Commonwealth and the country that are happening at certain businesses, we will be implementing at polling places.
Let's move on to another topic.
Okay.
We'll put up additional information in posts.
Yes.
Okay. Here's the next question. What worker support can be offered to undocumented residents and other limited English proficiency immigrants, LEP if you will, who are shut out from the unemployment insurance and direct assistance? What are the state and federal governments doing to address the food, shelter, and healthcare needs of undocumented residents?
I want to go ahead.
It's a mix. If it were up to the Democratic House alone, we would have included probably, I say very likely, the undocumented in the many programs that we have laid out so far. For example, the unemployment insurance. However, that was not flying with this White House run by Donald Trump and Stephen Miller, and certainly not with the Senate run by Mitch McConnell. It is still a priority in this next package, the CARES 2 package. But right now, the invisible people, the people that are here without papers, are truly invisible when it comes to the federal programs. On the other hand, we have tried to do our best, and I know Senator Favola has also, to let everybody know about the many, many nonprofits that are out there offering food, the ones that are offering shelter, that we are blessed to live in a community, Northern Virginia especially, that has extraordinary social capital. For example, AFAC in Arlington, or the Arlington Food Bank. I mean, there's so many incredible resources, and those don't discriminate on the basis of whether you have valid citizenship papers or green cards. So we're basically relying on the citizenry to take care of people that are left out of the federal and probably the state programs. In the meantime, we're going to keep reaching out to try to include them. And by the way, I don't know a single hospital that will turn somebody away because they don't have a green card or citizenship. You know, the hospital center in Nova, they're going to take care of everybody.
I was just going to say, and this is an important message to our immigrant community. First, we want to thank the many, many immigrants who are contributing mightily to our well-being during this very challenging time. Many immigrants have very high-risk jobs in the sense that many of them are subject to exposure to the virus very regularly. These are delivery jobs. Some of these jobs they're still working in the farming industry. Some of them are doing things that are part of our essential supply chain. So we thank you. And I do want to emphasize that, access to healthcare is very much available. Doctors and hospitals are not going to deny care if somebody believes that he or she needs to go to the doctor, and that I don't know of a hospital that, to echo what Congressman Beyer said, who will not serve an individual needing medical assistance. Certainly, it's not an ideal system, and we need to do better. And we need to. This one thing this crisis is showing is that when there are gaps in protecting any sector of society, we're really all at risk. And I think that acknowledgement is coming forward and may help us shape policies in the future. If we were to ever get a real comprehensive immigration reform out of Congress, that would help considerably. And I know you've been working on this, Congressman Beyer, but it's really, this whole issue of coronavirus has just illuminated a lot of other gaps in the way we have been doing business. And I will just put a plug in for my paid sick leave. I did not get a bill through the General Assembly this year. We had a hefty discussion on it, but in the future, I'm hoping that all employers will be able to offer paid sick leave, will be required to offer paid sick leave, at least for a certain period of time. So no individual would be expected to go to work sick, even if he or she is a low-wage worker. So there are lots for us to look forward to or working on, and we will try to do that. And kudos to our nonprofits who are serving our immigrant population every day.
And we have, the Arlington Free Clinic, which is terrific, and Neighborhood Health, which is also terrific. We have some really good resources. And by the way, Barbara, just to reinforce that, if you don't have papers, please go to the hospital or the clinics anyway. Across the country, we have too many people dying at home because they were afraid to seek medical care, and they get sick, and then we lose them.
No, thank you very much. That's an important point. Okay.
And ma'am, this might be a question for you. Are you willing to ask Governor Northam to replace his March 23rd Executive Order number 53 with one that's more effective? Governor Northam's March 23rd Executive Order number 53 placed certain limited restrictions on Virginia's non-essential businesses. His order did not close any of these businesses or other non-essential activities.
That order has been superseded by a recent order, and it was Governor Northam did issue an Executive Order 55, I think I mentioned in my opening remarks, which does call for a lockdown and does ask individuals, unless they're contributing in some essential activity, to stay at home. And then if an individual goes out, to again wear a face mask and to keep social distancing, which would be 6 feet apart from another person. And Governor Northam has a very extensive list. We can put a link to that executive order on our Facebook page. Since I went over it at the beginning, I won't reiterate it again. I know there are other topics, but we are hoping individuals, this is the kind of thing where each one of us has to be responsible, because it's not just our well-being, it's the well-being of our families and our children and our communities. And we're depending on each other to get through this. We're in this together.
And Barbara, if I could add to that too, when Governor issued the order, he said, stay at home, don't travel, non-essential, until June 10th.
Yes.
At that point, the University of Washington pandemic projections for Virginia were the end of May before we hit the peak. As of this morning, they've now moved that up to April 26th. And in fact, the national peak is supposed to be today. After today, we should see a decline in the number of cases reported every day if the model works, and the model's been data driven. I asked Governor Northam the other night on he has a weekly call with all the members of Congress, would that change his June 10th date at all? And he wisely, as a physician, said, "We're going to let the data drive that." And I'm sure many of you saw the New York Times article that came out yesterday afternoon that said opening prematurely could give us a second wave with a much higher death rate than the first wave. So I know the governor's going to be very cautious about amending any of those dates.
I think that's right, and we're very fortunate that our governor is very driven by science, and he is briefed regularly, almost daily, actually, on what is going on in the state, and he is getting the best advice that's out there. So, and he's allowing the experts to create this decision framework, which I think we're really fortunate.
He is the only governor in America that's actually a physician.
Yeah, that's right. I was just going to say that.
We got a couple of more questions about the upcoming presidential election. Is there anything that anyone here wants to add about Vice President Biden, perhaps about his cabinet, or any of the issues that he's been talking about or not talking about?
Well, the convention's been moved in Milwaukee from July to August, at which point we hope that we will be largely done with this pandemic. He's still looking for a woman vice president. I don't know if he's considering Senator Favola or not, but I bet you're available, Barbara, right?
Oh, I don't know. I like the Senate, but yeah, sure.
And it will be an interesting race. I was on a Zoom call with Charlie Cook the other night of the Cook Report, who predicted that pandemic allowing, this will be the highest turnout of both the right and the left, Democrats and Republicans, in a general election in a long time, that both bases are very, very fired up. And that, we think it will come down to the big three states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Right now, Joe Biden's got a nice lead in both Michigan and Pennsylvania. Wisconsin's very close. But because of the changing nature of states, we find that Arizona and North Carolina are quickly moving towards the purple blue that Virginia is, and that Florida is very much in play. And that, especially with Governor DeSantis's rather cavalier attitude so far towards the coronavirus, among the slowest governors to react, sadly, in the country. So we have at least 6 major states that Trump won last time that Biden could win this time. And so we're pushing for it. And Virginia, we don't think is going to be a battleground state, but you can't be sure about that.
Right.
Mark Warner does have an opponent in the primary, but we'll at a minimum, we need to have a very strong turnout in Virginia just to offset. And one of the dilemmas with the Electoral College is that most of the national pros think that Biden could win by 5 or 6 million votes and still not necessarily win the Electoral College. So we've got to not just turn out lots of votes in Virginia and New York and California, but win those critical swing states.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. There's actually a movement. I get mail sometimes on the national vote movement, which would, to maybe you know more about this than what I've been gleaning from my emails, but apparently when enough states that garner the 270 electoral votes decide that they want to move towards a popular vote, they would then be in a position, I guess, to pass legislation. We would need, I believe, federal legislation to allow for a national vote as well. Is that not true, Congressman Beyer?
No, you wouldn't need federal. It could be done just at the state level.
That was a question. That was a question that came up.
The dilemma is it's a lot harder to see how you get to 270. We can get to 220, even 230, the last couple are going to be tough.
It's going to be tough because we
but-
can't, the way it's structured, I don't believe the states can really pass anything till we get to the 270. Is that your understanding?
Exactly. Well, it doesn't make any difference till we get to the 270.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
But as my friend Pete Buttigieg says, it would be nice to move back to that old-fashioned idea that whoever gets the most votes wins the election. However, this was part of the original compromise that was meant to preserve slavery, was the Electoral College, to allow the smaller slave states to have equal weight with the larger, more faster growing industrial non-slave states. And it's gonna be very difficult to figure out how to change this constitutionally. We have to keep trying.
I think so too. Okay, are there other areas of
Yes,
we should discuss?
actually, I think this next question is for Congressman Beyer and also for you, Senator. We've been getting a lot of questions from parents, but not only parents in the traditional sense, but also foster parents. And I know that there's been a $500 per child check that's coming, that's part of the stimulus. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of what that means for foster parents or in the kinship care system?
I can speak to that first. I've been working pretty rigorously in the foster care area actually for many years, and it really is it's a struggle. Our communities are looking for emergency foster care families right now because we do have situations where a foster parent must self-quarantine and there is a child in the house, or a foster parent has been hospitalized and there's no other adult in the home to supervise the child. What happens is the child would end up going back into the system, and we need placements for those children. It's incredibly challenging right now because every family is struggling to maintain its own health and sanity, with their children being home. But our folks who are our little ones who are most vulnerable, it's really very it's heartbreaking. So for those of you who know of folks who would be interested in being emergency foster parents, there is a screening process, but I would advise you to and plead with you to have individuals contact the local Child Protective Service agency.
And I don't know what I have to add to that, but Barbara, thank you for your years of work on it. I know when Tim Kaine's wife, Ann Holton Kaine, was First Lady, and among her priorities was the kids who age out of the foster system.
Yes, I worked on the Fostering Futures, got that passed. That was
that's really something that most of us, unless we're deeply engaged in it, don't think about. What happens to that 22-year-old who has no one to celebrate her birthday or Christmas or Easter or Hanukkah, any of that stuff. I've made a note to go back and figure out whether or not the $500 per child also applies to foster children living in a home. If it doesn't, it should. And so if it doesn't, we'll try to clean that up.
that would be great. And there was a question that had come up on an earlier, I guess I was on a Zoom meeting, and we had some federal officials there. What happens if the child moves back home, is under the age of 21, but was not claimed on the parent's federal income tax? I think there's a snag there that maybe can be addressed through the regulatory process. Maybe some of these can be addressed through the regulatory process, or maybe you need new language, but whatever you can do to help with the foster care issue, and then of course with those younger people moving back home who may not have been claimed on the parents.
Yeah. And we'll try to, as much of this as we can do just through discussions with Treasury and IRS and regulatory. It's so much faster to do it that way.
It is, yeah. And you've been very, very good at as good as one could hope to get the administration to move when they have to move. Yeah. It's been yeoman's work, but we appreciate your work, Congressman.
Absolutely.
This next question, I believe, is for Congressman Beyer and perhaps Commissioner Bowman. Will Congress step in to save the post office? And if not, how will vote by mail work?
Jessica, do you want to take the first crack at that?
I will let you, Congressman, because I'm curious about your answer.
Well,
The Postal Service is still funded with federal money. Is that the point?
That would be correct.
yeah, we're
Correct.
the Virginia delegation is very supportive of the U.S. Postal Service. Jerry Connolly, Jessica Wexton, and I especially are, I think, on every bill out there that will continue to strengthen it. They have been really, really unfairly punished by a congressional decision made 10, 12 years ago that requires the Postal Service to pre-fund retirement and healthcare benefits for employees, not only that they haven't hired yet, but that in many cases haven't been born yet. I don't know where this came from. The conspiracy theorist in me thinks that maybe the people competing against the Postal Service were trying to handcuff them. And they've done it pretty well because they've been running $5 and $6 billion a year losses, which is almost always roughly equal to what they're putting into this prepaid pension benefits. So in the last CARES Act, I can't remember the exact number. I think it was 11 billion just to the Postal Service. They have been the frontline workers here, maybe not quite as much at risk as the nurses and the doctors and the nursing center workers, but they're going to our houses every day with packages that they don't know where they've been. They've been connecting us as we shift to buying things from Amazon and the like. The Postal Service has been keeping us connected, so they are real heroes in this. And we're going to try to make sure that the Postal Service stays strong. And obviously, it's a huge part of making vote by mail successful. If things are dragged out, we've been so
Actually connected.
that basically most of my life, if you mail something on Monday, whoever gets it on Tuesday. And we want to get back to that if we possibly can. It could be too, Jessica, that when we get to that point that there are different categories of mail, that you create a special category just for votes. They have a special kind of envelope or something, and they become the highest priority.
Deputy,
Yes.
did you want
Yeah, so currently the Postal Service does flag election mail and gives it a priority, helps us track ballots, those type of things. Also in some vote by mail states, and this will be something we will be exploring this summer, but we'll take funding, is actually drop boxes. So really secure drop boxes that people that are ballots with no postage. So imagine going to drop off a ballot in a drop box, similar to what people used to do with library books or bank drops before there was electronic deposit. When you go to the mechanic and maybe leave your keys in the car overnight, those type of mechanisms do exist. So we will be looking into those type of options. Hopefully, regardless of what happens to USPS. So those are some options that other states have implemented.
I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, that's an interesting idea. And it does reduce the cost somewhat, but it might slightly reduce the ability to vote. I don't know, but we have to look at everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree.
This next set of questions, we got a lot from small business owners, and so I believe this should go to Congressman Beyer and to you, Senator Favola. So we got a lot of questions from small business owners who are having trouble getting status updates on their EIDLs and their PPP applications, to the SBA for their disaster loans or their paycheck protection loans, which are forgivable that the Congressman mentioned. We're also getting some questions about the pandemic unemployment assistance. So basically, is there anything that you can tell us about where folks can go if they're small business owners, self-employed, gig workers, if they need status updates and they're not able to get them on their own?
Yes. The only thing we can plead for here is patience. The systems have just been overwhelmed. The first day that a gig worker, a 1099 worker could apply for the paycheck protection stuff was yesterday on the 10th of April. I'm sure the banks were once again overwhelmed. The small businesses started last Friday, April 3rd, and most banks were overwhelmed. Wells Fargo hit its $10 billion limit right away. Many banks were saying they wouldn't take you unless you were a pre-existing loan customer, not even a checking account or a credit card. We've moved a lot of that in the last week, and it should just get easier and easier. The money has not yet begun to flow, but that again should start Monday or Tuesday for the people that had applied a week ago. So all I can say is the systems are so overwhelmed right now because there's so many businesses applying. We talked earlier about the Virginia Unemployment Office once again being overwhelmed. Everyone will get on top of it little by little, day by day. I know people working really hard to get the money out the door. And so we get lots and lots of incoming complaints, requests, confusion, and even fear. Let me assure you that the intent of Congress, and I believe the intent of the administration too, is to get the money to you as quickly as possible, not to be nickeling and diming people. We're not looking to disqualify people from the loan forgiveness. In fact, we'd rather just call it grants, because only the people that are really disregarding, ignoring the requirements aren't going to have the loans forgiven. And just get the money out there. So all I can say is be patient with your bank. We know systems are crashing, computers are crashing, phones aren't getting answered, but that should get better day by day by day.
It's one of those things where if you don't really fund the civil service, you don't have civil servants available when you need them, and probably you needed upgraded computer systems as well. But thank you for moving that.
Barbara, one interesting thing, the percentage of federal civil employees number per American citizen is the lowest in our lifetime. The year I was born, we had 5 federal civil servants for every 100 employed Americans. Today we have 2. So this is a system with no slack. That you don't, when you have excess capacity and there's a crisis, the capacity goes to work. When you don't have excess capacity, things just snap. It's the best visual line I've ever seen was when you look at the high wire lines that go across the countryside, they always have big loops in them. So when they get covered with ice, they don't snap. If they were straight, boom, the rainstorm would break it. And so what we had is a federal civil service that was completely taut.
And now we need our civil servants. So whenever I go to a meeting, I always thank those who do work in for the federal government as a civil servant, because they're really making day to day.
And it's virtually everyone, from the Department of Labor trying to get all these regulations out, Health and Human Services trying to keep all of us healthy, even the EPA, which has been gutted unfortunately in the Trump years, doing their darndest to make sure that we don't fall back on our environmental protection through this.
And I will say, and I think Deputy Commissioner Bowman would appreciate this, our state employees are doing awesome work. I mean, everything that they do every day, they think about it through the lens of the COVID ID crises we're in, and then how can we improve the lives of Virginians? And they are thoughtful, and they're dedicated, and they're working incredible hours to guide the state, to serve our constituents, to ensure that we have a budget so that we can really provide services. Our state employees are doing an impressive job. So I just want to say that publicly. I don't know. I don't know if anybody ever is going to listen to this, but
And that includes Jessica too, right?
I include Jessica too.
The Senator, by the way, one of the things that you probably had a hand in was that Governor Northam's increasing the staff of the Virginia Employment Commission by 20% by rearranging state employees to put the need,
Yes.
put the people where the need's greatest.
And that is what you should do if you're trying to govern. You should allocate resources where there's the need. I was very proud of them for doing that, and we need to do it. Okay, I guess we're ready for another cluster of questions.
Okay. This question is for both Congressman Beyer and Senator Favola. And someone asked, with concerns about getting vital resources, websites, phone numbers, and answers to questions out to folks who don't speak English as well. Maybe their first language is Spanish or something else even. What do you have to say to folks who are concerned about language issues?
Language issues. That's a great question. Some of the localities have translated information into different languages. In Arlington, we have 129 languages spoken in our public schools. I mean, so we're really a jurisdiction where our constituents are coming from around the world, and our children are speaking English as a second language at fairly high rates. So their parents need to access information. We do have translation services, and I guess I will ask Congressman Beyer if there are extensive translation services when individuals call the federal programs. There are some translation services when calls are made to the state. I don't know how extensive they are.
Yeah, and the feds don't take that many incoming questions. IRS, although the IRS is famously understaffed. So most of the paycheck protection stuff and the gig workers and the 1099s are all going through the banks. On our little staff of 14, we have French, German, Spanish, and Portuguese speakers to help with different people. And so and I believe our website is available in Spanish for all the normal stuff. I'm not sure whether the latest things we put on there are in Spanish, but we try to keep that up to date too, because we do have so many Spanish speakers in Northern Virginia.
Yeah, we do. I will say that a large part of the education effort that has been around the COVID-19 issue, we have reached out to our churches and to our nonprofit groups who have strong connections to their respective immigrant communities, and they are a good source of information and advice. And oftentimes our immigrants are turning to institutions they trust, which frequently are the churches. Our large Latino population is turning to the Catholic Church. The Catholic churches up here in Northern Virginia, our Muslim population, a lot of them are going to the Adams Center, and that those are just examples, but it's really important that the information, the state information, gets out to these organizations and faith-based groups that will have the most connection with our immigrant communities. Because to be honest, a lot of this information needs to be explained and needs to be taken in context.
We've got time for a couple of more questions, and I believe this next question is for both Senator Favola, Congressman Beyer. While courts are not currently processing evictions, at some point the rent will be due. What steps can be taken by the state or federally to stop evictions and cancel rent to protect communities?
Well, right now in Virginia, the Virginia Supreme Court did come out with a mandate that evictions will be stopped unless there's an extreme emergency or health risk at stake. But other than that, evictions will be stopped. My advice, and the advice that we have been giving to our renters, is to please talk to your landlords. Tell them the situation you're in and see if some kind of an arrangement can be made for you to perhaps make a partial payment. We're hoping landlords can be flexible, but there's nothing there's no mandate now that will totally relieve your rent payment or will necessarily relieve the rent payment going forward in the future. So we're expecting landlords to work with tenants, and we're hoping that, you know, folks can come up with a mutually agreeable arrangement for this very difficult time while there's high unemployment, and then, you know, pick up the regular agreement after the economy gets back.
And I don't have much to add. We're trying to suspend all evictions that have to do with federal loans and federal programs through HUD, but we can't, at the moment, we haven't interfered with what's happening at the private sector and state levels. But clearly, the moral thing to do is to pause all evictions until this pandemic is over.
And we have one last question, which I believe goes to all three of you. Will there be a more organized and coordinated federal and state response if a second wave of the virus hits? This is a concern because we're social distancing and not developing herd immunity. This was an audience question.
Well, boy, we're hoping that over time, perhaps a vaccine will be created. There has this pandemic continues, we are all learning as we go, and our scientists are putting their best heads together. They are coming up with, at least there's talk of coming up with expedited tests for the COVID-19 where we can get results quickly. And there are some laboratories that are now trying to work on a vaccine. So I don't know what the time frame for this would be, but the one thing we do know is that social distancing has made a difference. Scientists are telling us that numbers would be much higher if we were not following social distancing and wearing our masks and staying home. So we're learning, and we're going to evaluate this in a very analytic way, and hopefully the best talent and the best ideals and our best moral conscience will come, everything will come together, and we'll be able to we'll have a better plan if we hit a second wave.
Yeah, we'll be much better prepared. The PPE will finally all be there, but rest about the time we don't need it. It turns out all the ventilators were fine in Virginia. We weren't any beds short, we were in ICU short. But yes, and we've yet to see, I think Andy Slavin just in the last day or two, along with somebody else, Friedman, has come out with a comprehensive national strategy. I've talked with a number of really smart people this last week trying to do the same thing. Has not come from the White House, but there will be one. And of course, the primary thing is not to have that second wave. And with that, Senator, I've got to fly to another meeting, but thank you for allowing me to be part of this.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. I've learned a lot, and we appreciate it. It's 11 o'clock. Deputy Commissioner Bowman, thank you so much. I think I'm going to sign off as well. Is there anything else that we need to cover?
No, ma'am. If we didn't get to your question, I will do my best to reach out to you personally and answer your question for you that way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I couldn't see it on Facebook.
It's okay. People were asking questions. I mean, I think people are so forgiving right now because, you know.
Yeah.
And that was